I believe a deadline will actually help provide the Iraqis with the motivation and the pressure to step up and take control. General Abazad made it clear that that's essential to our strategy. Key to providing the motivation is making sure that they, in fact, begin to take control and begin to define their own future. Mr. President, as we give the Iraqis more control over their own destiny, we also have to hold them accountable for the fundamentals of leading their country on the construction as well as the basic resolution of the political differences within the oil revenues, the federalism issue, which are the two great stumbling blocks fundamentally to a resolution. Why the President didn't make the condition of providing additional security and putting additional Americans online, why he didn't make their resolution of those issues a precondition is beyond me. But American forces are now going to be put at greater risk, more kids at harm, without the fundamentals that are the essential and that are completely out of the power of any squad or company or battalion to be able to resolve. Mr. President, when Prime Minister Maliki took power in May, General Casey and Ambassador Khalilzad said the new government had 6 months to make the political compromises necessary to win public confidence and unify the country. 6 months last May. They were right. And yet, with no real deadline to force the government's hand, that period passed without any meaningful action, and we are now seeing the disastrous results. So to ensure that history does not repeat itself, we need to put those benchmarks in place, and we need to have those benchmarks agreed upon. And that is the least, again, that we can ask on behalf of our troops. Mr. President, I also believe a deadline is essential to getting Iraq's neighbors to face up to the realities of the security needs of the region. If we're going to be concerned about Iran, it should not be surreptitiously based on them using us. It should be all of us together defining a new security arrangement for the region. General Zini has talked about that many times. He's one of the most respected hands in that region. In addition, Mr. President, our own intelligence agencies tell us that the war in Iraq is fanning the flames of jihad. And we have to stop serving as an al-Qaeda recruitment tool. When are we going to take that seriously here in the United States Senate? We spend a lot of time and energy in order to reorganize the intelligence community. We supposedly have the best intelligence now, and that intelligence in the conglomerate is telling us this current policy is putting America at greater risk because we're creating more terrorists, fanning the flames of unrest in the region, and creating a recruitment tool for al-Qaeda in that region. Mr. President, you can see the results. Hamas is more powerful today. Hezbollah and Nasrallah, more powerful today. Iran, more powerful today. Syria, more willing to play with Iran than to care about what the concerns might be with the rest of the region. We've gone backwards, and we have gone backwards because of this policy. How can this administration stand up and say to us that we have to fear the security interests of the future when the security interests of the present are moving in the wrong direction? Mr. President, Afghanistan, where the diversion of resources to Iraq has already allowed the Taliban to rise again, is increasing as a threat to those long-term security interests. Osama bin Laden roams free, while a regenerated al-Qaeda continues to plot attacks on American interests. The flourishing opium trade has turned the country into a virtual narco state, funding insurgents and warlords and threatening the viability of the Karzai government. Now our generals on the ground in Afghanistan are warning in the darkest possible terms that the Taliban is poised to launch a major new offensive in Afghanistan, and they have issued an urgent appeal for more U.S. troops to fight back. Instead of sending 20,000 troops over to Iraq, we ought to be listening to our military commanders and giving them the few thousand more troops they desperately need to deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan. On the broader regional front, we clearly need to come to grips with the need to engage Iran in a way that not only deters Iran from nuclear or other military adventurism, but does not inadvertently create another disastrous war that is not in our national security interests and I want to take one moment before closing to speak to that. I am hardly the only one in the Senate who is concerned about a terrible byproduct of the administration's escalation plan for Iraq, that product could be movement towards a calculated military conflict with Iran, which would further destabilize the Middle East, fan the flames of intra-Muslim and Muslim Western violence. In fact, many Americans are increasingly concerned that the administration's rhetoric regarding Iran sounds eerily familiar. Congress must make it absolutely certain that we do not make the same mistake we made in rushing to war with Iraq, starting by making it clear President Bush does not have the authority to engage Iran militarily, excepting, of course, some immediate attack on our troops or definable and palpable emergency. He does not have the authority to engage them without express congressional authorization. Looking at recent developments, it's not hard to see why people are concerned. In the President's speech introducing his new Iraq strategy, he issued a thinly veiled threat that sounded like the administration was at least contemplating military operations on the Iranian side of the border. In the past few weeks, we've arrested Iranian nationals in 2 separate incidents in Iraq. The initial operations against Shiite militias in Baghdad are bound to exacerbate tensions with Iran even further. And we recently sent another aircraft carrier to the region, ratcheting up our aggressive posture. Taken alone, individually, there's a certain logic to each of those actions. Taken on the whole, however, they have created the impression in the region. And as we all know, impressions are what ultimately push leaders to make judgments about threat and to make determinations about their own actions. The impression in the region is that we have taken the side of the Sunnis in the conflict with Iraq. Whether that's true or not, we must never forget that in the Middle East especially, perception is reality. If we're seen to be favoring the Sunnis, we run the risk of alienating the Shiite majority that will ultimately be running Iraq. That's the reality. And inflaming extremism throughout the region. It is essential that we remain even-handed in our own actions as well as our words in our efforts to bring stability to Iraq. There's another reason why, as the Iraq Study Group suggested, that we should engage Iran and Syria. Leadership means talking with countries who aren't our friends. President Kennedy reminded us, never fear to negotiate, but never negotiate out of fear. We, Mr. President, need to engage directly when our vital national security interests are at stake. We've done it all through our history. Richard Nixon sent Henry Kissinger to China. President Reagan went to meet with Mikhail Gorbachev and came to an agreement on arms after defining the evil empire. The conversation that I had recently in the Middle East with Senator Dodd when we traveled there together with President Assad of Syria led us to believe that a dialogue could, in fact, be constructive in working towards the goal that we share with Syria of creating a stable, secular Arab Iraq. That is at least what President Assad said he would like. It seems to me, given the morass we're in, it is worth putting that to the test. Mr. President, we can't turn back the clock and reverse the decisions that brought us to this pass in Iraq and the Middle East. We can't achieve the kind of clear and simple victory that the administration promised the American people so often, even as the conditions in Iraq grew worse and worse. But we can avoid an outright defeat. We can avoid creating the chaos we say we want to avoid. We can avoid a victory for our adversaries by identifying specifically what we can and cannot accomplish in Iraq. With the new Congress comes a new responsibility to get this policy right. That starts with preventing the President from going forward with this senseless escalation. And it has to end with finding an exit strategy that preserves our core interests in Iraq, in the region, and throughout the world. I look forward to having a real debate, Mr. President. I hope we can find that way.